Howdy, I'm Matt from Milkman Brewing Co. Today's project, what the f is raw ale? So first off, let's pour a raw ale, find out. Here it is. This is gonna be raw ale 3.0 essentially. Ran a little experiment on it. As you can see, it's pretty hazy, kind of harder to see through, but so what is raw ale and why raw ale? You'll find that this style or this technique was pretty popular going back a long time, and the reason why it's raw ale, they didn't boil it, was due to the availability or their lack of a good metal kettle to be able to boil with, or a good constant heat source to be able to keep a good rolling boil for it. So it was something that was just kind of easier for them to essentially just mash in with and then continue down it. There are many approaches to raw ale. There's no like one way to do it. So the way that I do it, and we'll kind of get into it here in a little bit, but I kind of mixed a little bit of a modern take on raw ale with kind of more of the traditional side to some extent. I've been pretty pleased with it. This one here being 3.0, I ran an experiment on. What I did was for my hop tea, I had half an ounce extra of cluster. I just threw it in at basically what would be the flame out addition for the hop tea, just to see what would happen. I think it's kind of helped push up some more of the citrus type characteristics and esters. A lot of people, when I talked about it here recently, they said that probably shouldn't be possible with cluster. All I can say is you know, the recipe that I use for this has been the same for all the farmhouses and stuff that I've done. This same recipe has been the same one for both raw ales, and the only thing I did different between both of these other raw ales and this one was that half an ounce of cluster. So I'm gonna attribute it to that and just kind of go from there on it, while I still play with this style, this technique, and kind of have fun with it. Nowadays it's brewed for a couple different reasons. One of them is to kind of maybe pay homage to the traditional way of brewing, or at least that brewing type. You can speed up your brew day with doing this technique or this style. You can turn a beer around pretty quickly. You can turn a good tasting beer around quickly with limited equipment and limited time invested into it. So I think that that's a pretty solid plus to making a raw ale. Additionally, with raw ale, you can start to chase certain profiles or lack thereof profiles. You're not really gonna chase clarity, but maybe you need a style that isn't very clear. So that might be a reason why you want to do it. But to kind of add some additional mouthfeel and body to your beer might be another consideration for brewing raw ale. With raw ale being an older style farmhouse ale or technique, the sky's really kind of the limit with this. You can really start to push your creativity with it. I would say that there are some things that you probably shouldn't do with it, but you can make it as simple as like a smash ale type beer, or you can go with a lot more complexity. I know that there's some pale ale and some hazy type IPAs out there that they take this same approach to that beer. So they'll not boil it, or they'll make a hop tea for it or whatever, and add it back into the wort. I would say that the biggest key again is to not boil it, and you want to try to keep those temperatures low enough so you don't gain DMS. And we'll kind of get into how I try to prevent DMS here in just a minute. Now, for things that you need to take aware of being risk are, of course, the DMS, but additionally infections. I kind of have the standpoint of, if you're clean and sanitary, you run just as big of risk of brewing one of these and getting an infection as you do brewing any other style. If you're cooling the wort down to pitching temperature and you're boiling off all those potential nasty critters out of the wort, I think you're running just as likely there. Do your own research when it comes to something like that. But this would probably be a style that I would advocate for no chilling the wort, just let it come down naturally. If you had to, at basically when you're done with your mash, put your lid on, and if you decide to do pasteurization at that point, to maybe take your cattle, go ahead and put it in an ice bath, or put it in some cool water in a bathtub or something to maybe try to help it get out or get it down to temperature. Make sure that you keep that lid on, that sanitized lid, to help prevent any point of infection or anything getting in there that you wouldn't want to. Another safeguard that you can employ to help ward off any kind of infections is your water treatment for raw ale. I currently do not do anything as far as water treatment when I brew a raw ale. I just use regular RO water. I don't add any salts or anything like that. But you can do things with your water when you're bringing it up to strike temperature and you're mashing in and things like that. You can use things like juniper branches, juniper berries. I saw somebody was using like spruce tips, some other people using like cedar branches and twigs and things like that. One, to help try to ward off any kind of bacteria or any kind of bugs, kind of keep that stuff down to a minimum anyways, but also maybe try to help import some of those flavor characteristics that you would pick up from that. And I guess at that point then it's going to be kind of like a first wort hopping or whatever, where you're bringing in some of that stuff, but with the added benefit that you're making something that's antiseptic. You're trying to make it to where basically the only thing that's really going to thrive in that environment is going to be hopefully that good yeast pitch that you're going to put on there to eat up all those sugars. While we're talking about limiting the effects or the ability of having infections, another point that safeguard that you can employ would be hop teas. So I've made a few hop teas so far. They've worked really well at this point. I normally will get the hop tea going before I start my mash, so that way I try to time it to where that hop tea has a little bit of time to cool off. No chill style, basically lid on, move to a different burner on the stove inside, and after my mash is done, it's cooled down a little bit to where I can bring that out, and it'll help bring up that mash just a few degrees. But you would basically take your hop tea and you're going to take a limited amount of water, and you're going to start your boiling process like you normally would when you're boiling wort and you're using your same hop schedule for that. My hop teas have consisted of 2 quarts of water over a 60-minute boil time. I've done the 1 ounce of East Kent Goldings and the 1 ounce of Saaz at 5 minutes. And then for this one, like I said, basically at flame out, throw in that other half an ounce of cluster, and just to kind of see what it would do. Adding the hop tea is pretty simple, and one advantage that I have anyways, being a brew in a bag brewer, is that when I take that hop tea and I pour it into my mash, and then I go pull my grain bag out, all the spent hop materials coming out with that, and then I'm just in one kettle. I think that also helps eliminate another point of infection, is you're not going to keep switching things to different vessels and doing a bunch of back and forth stuff. You want to try to keep everything in that one kettle, that one area. You know, I know you could probably do it doing some like recirculation, you know, if you had the branches and stuff in there to kind of get everything moving along, but keeping that, you know, but the hop tea, I feel like, is a pretty simple way to employ a layer of protection there. Now, hops aren't the only thing that you can use to help ward off, you know, the bacterias and bugs and stuff like that. You know, especially if you've treated that water with that the juniper berries and the juniper branches. You know, that's gonna help. But things like spices, naturally, I think like clove and, you know, cinnamon and stuff like that are naturally repellent type thing, and so maybe you'll have an ability to be able to work some of that into your mash as well, or make a tea out of that stuff and go from there on it. Those are some areas that I still kind of want to play in. I think that one of the next times that I make raw ale, I think I'm definitely going to shoot for at least adding some juniper berries into it to see what it adds. I feel like I got a pretty good handle on everything that I've done before now with raw ale, so I'm kind of excited about that. I really wish that I had a place where I had some juniper branches to be able to try that out, but I haven't found any yet. Pasteurization is another point that I employ in the making of raw ale. I kind of feel like it's almost a key component. I don't think that, you know, normally people would do it, or that it was done traditionally, but pasteurization is something that I thought that would be that extra layer of security, but also kind of help make sure that I stay out of that temperature range for DMS. So what I've done is, when I started looking into pasteurization, there's a lot of different thresholds that you can use for pasteurization, for temperature and for the time into this. And I found on like the USDA's website was like milk was pasteurized at like 115 for like 10 minutes or something like that. So I chose 165 degrees Fahrenheit for 15 minutes. And I felt like that was gonna gain me the maximum protection. It gets me right under where, at that point in time, I had done some research about like when DMS forms, that was right under its threshold for it to, you know, get in there and take hold of a beer. Now that I've kind of gone back and I've revisited some things that I've done, I've seen that there were some potential that there were people that were saying potentially that is still a high enough temperature to gain DMS. I don't really know if I'm going to change up my pasteurization. I haven't really picked up on any DMS in any of these beers so far. I don't necessarily think that if it was, it would be a super bad thing. Maybe depending on the amount that is in it, how strong it is. But look into pasteurization yourself and find out where you're comfortable with it, and just kind of go from there. I wanted to get up on that upper end just to kind of have that, you know, extra layer of protection in the back pocket there to help protect this beer, especially due to its lower or shorter shelf life that I've experienced anyways. I wanted to do everything that I could to help prolong it as long as possible. After the pasteurization point is done, I no chill. That's all I've ever done here with the raw ales, and that's what I do with the majority of the beers that I brew here. So again, if you find yourself where you're trying to get down to your pitching temperature as quick as possible, look into the ice bath or the cool water tub idea or trick, and hopefully that'll help you out. Because I use the Voss Quake, I found that I prefer to ferment quake at about 90-95 degrees Fahrenheit. And so once it comes down to the 95 mark, I go ahead and transfer it into the fermenter. I'll go ahead and I'll throw my yeast pitch in there at the bottom, and then as it's transferring, all that wort's mixing up with the yeast, adding all the air to kind of hopefully get it rocking and rolling. Once transfer is complete, that fermenter goes into my heated fermentation setup, and it works really well for this. Now, with the Voss Quake, it's normally done pretty quickly, as it is with pretty much any quake type strains. I will be kind of experimenting with some different yeast that are non-quake for this style to kind of help understand, you know, what some of the yeast are actually doing to this beer, now that I feel like, again, that I have a good handle on, you know, what needs to be done, and what attributes that I understand so far, and hopefully I'll help continue to gain a little bit more knowledge with this. I've got one project that I'm really looking forward to here pretty soon with it, that will actually be the next iteration of raw ale. So I noted during the first time that I brewed raw ale, I went ahead and I bottle conditioned it, and through my research I noticed that it was supposed to have a shorter shelf life, but it was also supposed to be ready and fully carbonated quickly. And it was. The first week that I brewed it, it was fully carved, it was ready to drink, it tasted pretty good, and it was just ready to go. And so that was pretty surprising. 2.0 and now 3.0 have been kegged. You know, you can quick carb those, so that's a pretty big plus there. Now, talking about the shorter shelf life, I noticed so far with the first one and the third one now anyways, the second one went pretty quick due to the competition, but the first one at week 5 leading into week 6, it kind of started to drop off in flavor profiles and stuff, and it wasn't bad, it just was different. It definitely had that kind of just older beer taste to it. It didn't taste as sharp, didn't quite smell as sharp. It was still really good. I mean, still some of my friends' favorite beers that I've brewed. This one, we're pushing week 4, fixing to head into week 5. As far as the aroma goes, it's not quite as aromatic. As far as the taste goes, I think that it tastes just as sharp as it did before, now anyways. So this is going to be an interesting take to maybe be able to compare if that other extra half an ounce really contributed to anything. That second raw ale, by the time that I took it to the competition, I mean, it was still a really young, fresh beer that was in its prime. And when it got to that competition, it didn't make it home. There was none of it left. It was completely gone. So I don't really have anything to compare it to that. But, you know, taking the notes and applying the data where you can, over the long run of this project or this series, we'll still have to take some things into consideration with that beer. So the style is hard for me to explain personally because I'm still trying to do a lot of the palate learning. I think that this beer has actually helped me gain a little bit more of those descriptor things while I try to process of, you know, what I've got going on. You know, you can definitely taste a lot more of the like thicker body when compared this recipe to some of those other farmhouses that I've made. So it's a thicker, you know, kind of tasting beer, and a lot of that's got to be due to those proteins that are still there. It seems like so far every homebrew that I've had of these raw ale type beers that are done like this, and my own, which I've only ever had like one other person's raw ale, I noticed too that there were a lot of similarities with the mouthfeel and the texture of the beer. They all kind of seem to be a little bit more of that citrus forward. Not that big of a fan of the citrus forward type beers. I've kind of learned to live with them. They're not awful, it's just they're a little bit more abrasive to me. But you know, there's a big difference between like the sweet orange citrus and like a grapefruit to me, you know, and like the grapefruits are kind of more or less abrasive to my tongue and my taste, whereas, you know, most oranges though I find like are appealing. Lime and lemons, not so much. But they're, like I said, they're a little bit harder to explain in my opinion. I think that everybody should brew one just to be able to experience a recipe that they know really well and see what the difference is there. Now, with all that being said, it's totally awesome to just be baffled a little bit and say, okay, let's think about this, let's apply this taste, this smell to this beer, and you know, then you go taste the same recipe but with a different yeast on it, and I think you can pick out those a lot easier than you can pick out some of these things. So after talking and trading some notes back and forth with a fellow Instagrammer, and I know he follows the channel, Milkman Brewing Co. He had some questions about some of my experiences with raw ale, and he wanted to attempt to do one. He was really kind of worried about some of the shorter shelf lives that I noticed and that I had noted, and I guess that he had seen too at other places. And so he was very, very kind enough to share his recipe on the beer that he brewed, and I'll put it in the description. But so we talked back and forth a lot, and he was curious about some of the techniques and some of the things that I found. And so he kind of like took my ideas and went one step further, which is making me want to go one step further. So, you know, thank you, Milkman. That's pretty awesome. But so for his beer, he used the Omega OYL033 Lithuanian Farmhouse, which was something that I wanted to play with too. I'm a big fan of that yeast, and I was kind of curious of what it would do to raw ale here, and go that route. Now, he did use the juniper berries and juniper branches. He also used some cedar stuff and things like that, and so that was really cool to see the progression of his recipe. So after a few weeks after he brewed it, I reached out back to him, and we were kind of still trading notes back and forth about, you know, the things that we've done and the things that we would change and stuff. And I asked him, I said, hey man, you should be, you know, kind of in week 5, week 6 of this, you know, what's your experiences with the shelf life? And he noted that basically it has gotten better for him there on that front. And so I'm curious, like, what exactly the differences are. So he has a different grain bill than I have. He used a different yeast than I did. And he went ahead and used the juniper berries and the juniper branches. And so he had a lot of other things going on. And so in that vein of thought is the sky's the limit with this style or this technique. And there's a lot of room left to play with and learn some things. You know, I'm just truly excited to be able to sit here and think like, okay, well, he did that, and so now I got to do it and see what it does to my grain bill, or, you know, his techniques and stuff like that. And so it's totally cool to be able to experience this and share this with you. You know, I hope you take the opportunity to brew one of these things. And if you do, please reach out to me, because I've got a ton of questions, and I'm still trying to learn it. I think it's a great beer to talk about, because, you know, what will fruit do to it? What will that yeast do to it? What happens if you dry hop it? You know, I think the only limitations that I would probably personally put on it, that I don't think that I would use a mixed fermentation yeast pitch on it. I don't think that I would use a lager yeast on it, or lager it. I don't think that either of those two things would be really beneficial to the beer. I think that it might be interesting to play with, but I just, from my experience anyways, and kind of some of the research that I've done, now I haven't looked into, can you use lager yeast with it? I'm sure you can, and I'm sure it will ferment out, but I don't think that you're going to get the experience that is raw ale with it. But everything else is on the table. So thank you so much for stopping by, checking us out. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do. We would love to gain our audience even bigger and badder and bolder. If you have done any raw ale stuff, please leave a comment. If you got any hits or tricks on it, let us know. Let's talk about it, and let's make raw ale an even bigger thing than it already is. Cheers, y'all. Howdy, I'm Matt from Jaggers. Hi, I've kind of butchered this. Man, I'm having trouble here. Wait for these sirens to go by. To ferment these beers. And